2026 is becoming the first year in modern U.S. history where every crisis hits at the same time. Inflation, housing collapse, rising crime, global war, nuclear warnings, political instability, all feeding into each other in real time. It's not one disaster. It's the collision of all of them at once. When historians look back at 2026, they won't just see a year on the calendar. They'll see a turning point, one of those rare moments where so many pressures collide at the same time that a country is forced into a new era, whether it's ready or not. And what makes 2026 even more unsettling is how deeply it mirrors the early 1930s, when Americans first realized that their world wasn't just changing, it was falling apart in slow motion. That same feeling is creeping across the U.S. now, not as a single event, but as an overwhelming combination of economic strain, social tension, geopolitical danger, and a level of instability that touches almost every corner of daily life. Just like the 1930s began with quiet warning signs, rising prices, job instability, political anger, 2026 opens with a sense that the country is walking into a storm nobody has the map for. Families who once felt secure are suddenly questioning every decision. Their rent, their mortgage, their job, their lifestyle, and even their location. And the biggest fear isn't about one crisis. It's the fear of multiple crises converging at the same moment, hitting a society that's already stretched thin. The housing crisis is the clearest symbol of this pressure. For years, people have been saying the market is unsustainable, but 2026 is the first year where it stops being a prediction and becomes a reality. Home prices remain out of reach for the majority of Americans, interest rates refuse to fall, and rent climbs so aggressively that entire neighborhoods feel like they're being emptied out. In the 1930s, the crisis was unemployment and breadlines. In 2026, it's families working full-time, yet still unable to secure a place to live. For young Americans, the dream of owning a home feels more distant than ever in modern history. Even older homeowners are struggling. Skyrocketing insurance, property taxes, and loan resets make them wonder whether they can hold on. When stability slips away from housing, everything else starts shaking with it. But the financial strain doesn't stop there. Inflation keeps pulsing through the economy like a slow but constant pressure against every paycheck. Prices don't come down, they just rise slower than before, which feels almost worse. Groceries, gas, utilities, medical expenses, even basic services like internet and transportation take a bigger bite each month. In the 1930s, it was deflation that destroyed people. In 2026, it's the opposite, a steady burn that drains every dollar faster than households can adapt. People feel it in the smallest moments. Standing in the supermarket, hesitating at the pump, checking their bank account before ordering something online. It's the kind of tension that builds quietly, unnoticed by politicians, but felt deeply by everyone else. And as prices rise, so does frustration, spilling into the streets in the form of rising crime. 2026 begins with reports of surging thefts, carjackings, break-ins, and violent crimes in cities that once promised safety. Police departments shrink from burnout, budget cuts, and resignations, leaving communities feeling unprotected. The 1930s had desperation-driven crime. 2026 has a mix of economic pressure, social collapse, and unchecked lawlessness. People talk about not going out after dark, keeping their doors double-locked, or avoiding certain routes, not because they're paranoid, but because they're adapting. When the middle class begins changing their behavior out of fear, a society is already shifting into dangerous territory. Meanwhile, the world outside America is anything but stable. The Russia-Ukraine war drags into another year, but by 2026, it becomes more dangerous than ever. With new weapons, expanded alliances, and a shrinking diplomatic window, global analysts warn that the conflict is entering a phase where escalation becomes easier than peace. Add in tensions in Asia, unpredictable leadership decisions across multiple nations, and the constant chatter of nuclear posturing. And suddenly, the American public faces a level of global uncertainty not felt since the Cold War. In the 1930s, global tensions quietly built in the background until a major conflict erupted. In 2026, those warnings are louder, and the stakes far more catastrophic. Nuclear threats no longer feel theoretical. They're part of the daily news cycle. Missile tests, military exercises, suspicious satellite movements, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. All of it forms a backdrop of unease that Americans feel, even if they don't talk about it openly. It's one thing for a country to face economic problems. It's another when those problems happen while the world itself feels unstable, unpredictable, and closer to disaster than anyone wants to admit. By the time the first quarter of 2026 closes, the feeling is unmistakable. This isn't just a tough year. It's a convergence year. The moment when multiple forces, building for more than a decade, finally hit the country at the same time. Just like the early 1930s, it starts slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. Until one day people wake up and realize the ground beneath them has shifted. And the most chilling part? This is only the beginning. By the time 2026 moves deeper into the year, the pressure that was once building quietly begins to show itself out in the open. It becomes visible not in dramatic explosions, but in the ordinary routines that suddenly feel unstable. People who once felt confident about their jobs, their homes, and their future begin second-guessing everything. The country feels tired in a way that's difficult to describe. Not exhausted from one big crisis, but worn down from dozens of small ones that never seem to stop. The economy becomes the primary battlefield. Every expert goes on television with a different prediction. Every politician claims to have a solution, and every household feels like it's playing financial defense. What makes 2026 different from other difficult years is the sense that problems aren't happening one at a time. They're overlapping. They're compounding. They're feeding off each other. A weakening job market fuels anxiety. Anxiety fuels lower consumer spending. Lower spending hurts businesses. Businesses cut hours or lay off workers. Those workers then struggle to pay their rising rent or mortgage. Landlords raise prices to cover their own mounting debts, and the cycle repeats. People feel trapped in this loop. The most uncomfortable part is how unpredictable everything becomes. One company announces massive layoffs, but another reports record profits. One city sees rents cool slightly, while the next town over experiences a surge. Financial markets climb for a week and collapse the next. The uncertainty feeds a kind of psychological stress that Americans haven't felt this intensely in decades. It becomes harder to plan, harder to trust, harder to believe anyone is actually in control of the situation. Housing pressures intensify as more Americans struggle to stay where they are. Mortgage holders face rate resets they knew were coming, but didn't think would hit this hard. Renters chase cheaper units that vanish within hours of being listed. Cities report rising eviction numbers. Suburbs once considered stable begin showing signs of strain. Empty homes, foreclosure warnings, and families moving out in the middle of the night to avoid confrontation. Even counties that were booming just a few years ago feel like they're entering a cooling period they're not prepared for. And the idea of buying a home becomes less of a goal and more of a fantasy for millions of young adults who feel locked out of the system entirely. Crime grows in response to the tension. Not just petty theft, but dangerous, unpredictable incidents that catch communities off guard. The kind of crimes people talk about for weeks. the kind that make neighborhoods feel different, colder, uncertain. Social media captures more of it, spreading fear faster than police departments can respond. Videos of brazen thefts, carjackings at gas stations, break-ins happening in broad daylight, store owners defending their businesses, and bystanders too afraid to intervene. The absence of consequences creates a public atmosphere where anything feels possible, and not in a good way. Some cities try to increase police presence. Others cut budgets entirely. Neither approach seems to solve the core problem. A society under pressure behaves unpredictably. When people lose economic security, when families feel cornered, when communities sense chaos, the line between order and instability becomes thinner than anyone wants to admit. Even wealthier neighborhoods begin hiring private security, adding cameras, and changing routines. Parents become more cautious. Workers avoid certain routes. Restaurants close earlier. What used to feel normal becomes something people have to think twice about. Meanwhile, global events loom over the country like a dark cloud. The Russia-Ukraine war grows more complex, with new alliances forming and old ones becoming strained. Conflicts that once felt distant suddenly feel closer to home, as reports surface about long-range missiles, new military technologies, and political leaders making statements that carry a sharper edge. Countries begin preparing in ways that no one openly discusses, but everyone can sense. Increased military spending, weapons testing, and intelligence operations becoming more aggressive. Nuclear warnings, once dismissed as dramatic headlines, turn into something heavier. Not panic, but a quiet awareness. The kind of awareness people felt during the Cold War when drills and briefings became part of daily life. Commentators debate missile ranges on television. Analysts track submarine movements. Entire online communities appear, dedicated to reading satellite images and interpreting military patterns. Families begin discussing scenarios they never imagined they would consider, not because they expect disaster tomorrow, but because the world feels volatile enough for the unthinkable to edge closer to the possible. Infrastructures crack under the weight of it all. Power grids stretch through intense weather seasons. Water shortages impact agricultural areas already struggling with rising costs. Transportation networks deal with shortages, delays, and unexpected shutdowns. Cyber attacks on banks, hospitals, airlines, and government systems trigger temporary chaos that feels like a preview of something larger. Whatever faith people had in the country's ability to handle emergencies begins to erode as new problems arrive faster than old ones can be fixed. The tension in 2026 comes from the realization that the U.S. is not facing a single threat. It's facing dozens, each feeding into the next, each making the others harder to manage. People wake up looking for signs of stability, but end the day feeling like everything is just slightly more fragile than it was yesterday. And as everyday life becomes more uncertain, the nation senses a shift. A subtle, unsettling shift that people can't fully describe, but they know it's there. In conversations, in headlines, in empty storefronts, in rising prices, in global conflicts, and in the feeling that something fundamental about the country is changing in real time. By the time 2026 reaches its most volatile stretch, the atmosphere across the United States feels heavier than anything in recent memory. People sense it in their routines, in their conversations, in the way news spreads faster and hits harder. Nothing feels isolated anymore. Every issue connects to something larger, and every event triggers a reaction that spirals far beyond its starting point. It's the kind of national tension that grows slowly, then suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. Political pressure becomes the loudest force shaping the country. The government is locked in battles that don't end. Battles between branches, between states, between parties, between agencies, and even between officials who once stood on the same side. Decisions that should be straightforward turn into national controversies. Court rulings spark immediate protests. Investigations trigger counter-investigations. Statements from politicians ripple across the economy, creating waves of panic or optimism that vanish within days. It's a system where everything feels reactive, where leaders seem to be responding to crises instead of preventing them. People stop expecting calm. They start expecting chaos. This political friction filters down into everyday life. Families split over disagreements. Workplaces feel tense. Communities grow divided. People aren't just debating, they're choosing sides. And those sides become identities. In the 1930s, political divisions were intense, but communication was slow. In 2026, every phone, every screen, every feed becomes a battlefield. Misinformation spreads within minutes. Arguments erupt instantly. Algorithms push people deeper into whatever fear or anger they already had. It creates a national atmosphere where trust is scarce and suspicion grows like wildfire. The crime surge continues feeding off this instability. Cities struggle to keep up with rising violence, and smaller towns that once felt insulated begin experiencing the same patterns. Headlines become numbing. Armed robberies, confrontations in stores, chaotic scenes at crowded events, tensions between residents and overwhelmed authorities. Police departments issue warnings about being understaffed. Emergency response times stretch longer. Ordinary citizens become more cautious, adjusting their routines to minimize risk. Businesses install more security, limit hours, or close entire locations. The feeling of safety, something Americans often take for granted, becomes something people have to actively maintain. Economic pressure keeps squeezing in ways that feel less like temporary hardship and more like a structural shift. Inflation slows but never truly reverses. Essentials remain expensive. Car insurance spikes. Medical costs hit new records. Food prices fluctuate unpredictably. Utilities become a monthly shock. Even basic home repairs turn into financial hurdles because supply chains remain unstable and labor shortages push prices higher. Families juggle bills like a puzzle they can't solve. Many begin using savings meant for emergencies, not because something went wrong, but because survival itself is the emergency. Debt becomes a national theme. Credit card balances reach historic highs. Student loans suffocate younger workers who already struggle with rent and stagnant wages. Auto loans become harder to manage as interest stacks up. People postpone major decisions: marriage, kids, buying property, moving cities. The lifestyle milestones that once defined adulthood now feel like luxury items. This creates a quiet, emotional strain that spreads through the population, a sense that progress is slipping away, replaced by survival mode. Meanwhile, global conflict intensifies. The Russia-Ukraine war evolves, pulling more countries into strategic decisions that feel increasingly consequential. Nations bolster their defenses, shift alliances, and conduct military exercises that grow bolder. Intelligence agencies warn about escalation scenarios that were once dismissed as unlikely. Reports emerge about cyber attacks targeting energy systems, financial networks, and communications infrastructure. The kinds of attacks that don't make headlines for long, but hint at deeper global vulnerabilities. Nuclear anxiety returns in a way the modern generation has never experienced. Not mass panic, but a steady, low-frequency dread. Government agencies quietly update preparedness protocols. Schools in certain regions revisit emergency procedures. Online communities track missile developments and military movements in real time. Experts debate new war doctrines. The public watches all of this and tries to decide how seriously to take it. But even without saying it out loud, people know something has changed. The world feels closer to a dangerous edge. Natural disasters add another layer to the internal pressure. Heat waves strain power grids. Floods disrupt supply lines. Wildfires destroy entire neighborhoods overnight. In agricultural regions, drought affects food production, raising questions about future shortages. Infrastructure that was never built for these extremes starts failing under the stress. Americans realize that even nature is adding weight to a country already burdened by economic, political, and social pressures. The housing crisis, instead of cooling, spreads unevenly across the nation. Some regions see massive price drops, wiping out homeowner equity in weeks. Others see spikes as people flee collapsing markets. Investors pull back. Construction slows. Rental markets tighten. Homelessness increases in both big cities and small towns, in some areas at levels not seen since the worst years of the Great Depression. Shelters overflow, and tent communities grow in places where people never imagined they'd see them. The idea that anyone can slip through the cracks becomes less of a warning and more of a lived reality. As all these forces collide, crime, inflation, political turmoil, global instability, housing failures, environmental stress, the country experiences something deeper than a crisis. It experiences a psychological shift. People feel worn down, cynical, uncertain about the long-term direction of the nation. Anxiety becomes the background noise of daily life. News events that once would have shocked the country now barely register, buried under the weight of the next breaking headline. The feeling that things are getting back to normal fades completely. Instead, the country settles into a tense, unpredictable rhythm, a sense that anything could happen at any time, and nobody can truly guarantee stability. For millions of Americans, 2026 becomes the year they realize the system isn't just strained. It's reaching its breaking point. As 2026 pushes deeper into uncertainty, something shifts across the country. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly. In the way people adapt when they realize the world they knew no longer works the way it used to. It's the moment when Americans stop expecting stability to return and start reshaping their lives around the instability itself. Not because they want to, but because they have to. And in that slow, reluctant transformation, the true weight of 2026 becomes clear. This is the year the nation is forced to confront what it's become. Communities begin changing their habits in ways that feel subtle at first. People who once drove freely at night now plan their errands around daylight hours. Families who once felt safe in their neighborhoods start investing in cameras, alarms, reinforced locks, or even moving entirely. The rising crime wave creates a kind of collective recalibration, a recognition that the social contract is fraying. People rely more on each other and less on institutions. Neighbors form informal watch groups. Local businesses work together to protect their storefronts. Apartment residents communicate more closely to share warnings or report suspicious activity. A sense of raw local survival replaces the trust that once existed in the larger system. Economic strain forces millions to reconsider how they live. The idea of the American lifestyle, the spacious home, the 2 cars, the regular vacations, the upward progression, begins to erode. Households shrink their spending in ways that become permanent rather than temporary. Families combine multiple generations under one roof. People split rent with distant relatives or longtime friends. Suburban migration reverses as more Americans move to smaller towns, rural areas, or cities with cheaper housing. Some leave the country entirely. Every month becomes a calculation, a rebalancing of what matters and what can be sacrificed. The housing crisis reshapes the landscape. Entire regions experience declines that were once unthinkable. Neighborhoods with half-empty streets, for sale signs that stay up for months. New developments halted mid-construction. Yet other regions experience the opposite. Population surges that overwhelm infrastructure, crush rental supplies, and push locals out of their own communities. Tension grows between longtime residents and newcomers, especially in areas that once prided themselves on stability. The idea of home, something deeply tied to American identity, becomes the subject of national anxiety. No one knows where the safe, affordable, sustainable place to live actually is. Schools, hospitals, and public services struggle to keep up. Staffing shortages reach critical levels in education, law enforcement, emergency response, and healthcare. Teachers face overcrowded classrooms and rising behavioral issues. Nurses handle impossible patient loads. Police respond selectively because they simply don't have the manpower. Fire departments confront equipment costs they can't cover. Local governments stretch budgets so thin that basic repairs, road maintenance, and social programs fall behind. What was once an organized system begins to resemble a patchwork of overworked individuals doing their best in impossible conditions. Global instability adds a heavy, unspoken layer to everyday American life. As geopolitical tensions intensify, especially in Eastern Europe and the Pacific, the awareness of conflict becomes part of the national mood. Reports about new missile tests, naval confrontations, cyber attacks, and international standoffs carry a different tone now. Not distant, not theoretical, not somewhere else. Americans start treating global conflict as background reality, similar to how older generations lived during the Cold War. Conversations shift from if something escalates to what happens when it does? The nuclear threat doesn't dominate every moment, but it lingers in the edges of public consciousness, shaping how people think about the future. Technology, once seen as the solution to everything, becomes another source of concern. Cyber attacks hit major banks, disrupting access to accounts for hours or even days. Airline systems fail due to digital interference. Cities report unexplained outages linked to foreign hacking. Americans realize how fragile the digital world is, how easy it is for hostile actors to disrupt life with a single invisible act. A generation raised on the idea that technology makes everything easier starts confronting the truth that technology is also a target, a weakness, a vulnerability built into the modern system. Weather extremes worsen, turning natural disasters into national events that stretch the country's emergency response capabilities to the breaking point. Wildfires destroy thousands of homes. Heat waves push power grids to near failure. Floods wipe out entire communities. Storms shut down interstates and airports for days. Agricultural regions experience harvest declines caused by drought or excessive rainfall, fueling new concerns about food prices and supply stability. These disasters hit at the worst possible moment, when Americans are already overwhelmed by financial stress, political division, and rising insecurity. Yet beneath all this pressure, something else grows. Not optimism, but realism. A sharp, grounded realism that forces people to rethink how they live, how they move, how they prepare, how they plan. Americans begin embracing resilience not as a trendy concept, but as a necessity. Families stock emergency supplies. Communities build mutual aid groups. People learn new skills, repair more, waste less, save more aggressively, and focus on practical survival instead of long-term dreams. The shift is cultural, mental, and widespread. This quiet transformation is what makes 2026 so significant. It isn't just a year of crisis, it's a year of reckoning, where the nation is pushed to abandon illusions about stability and confront problems that have been ignored for too long. People adapt because they don't have a choice. They become more cautious because reality demands it. They look for new ways to live because the old ways no longer work. And in that forced adaptation, a new American mindset begins to emerge, shaped not by comfort, but by pressure, not by confidence, but by awareness, not by growth, but by survival. 2026 becomes the year the country realizes the future won't look anything like the past, and the only way forward is to rebuild from the truth, not from the memories of what the nation used to be.